Hey guys, welcome to a mind-blowing episode of The Grey Escape. If you think the Wachowskis were onto something with their movie The Matrix, you're about to get an inside scoop on the science behind one extraordinary man's theory of the universe and whether in fact the whole thing could be an illusion. I'll tell you about that and more right after this. Anthony Peake is a British writer who deals with borderline areas of human consciousness. Pretty cool, right? If J.J. Abrams' show Fringe was a person, it would be Anthony Peake. He is in demand around the world as a speaker and a lecturer on consciousness. In fact, as we speak, he's in Australia giving a workshop surrounding his book, The Infinite Mindfield, and he's currently working on his 9th book. Why am I so excited about Anthony Peake? Well, for starters, since his first book, called Is There Life After Death, which was published in 2006, amongst other things, he has become one of the go-to people on the planet for near-death experience information. Now, maybe this is your first time with me, or maybe you've been with me from the beginning. Thank you. In which case, you've heard me speak about my own near-death experience back in 2012 when my blood pressure crashed and I started speaking scientific information, which has all been confirmed as true. Pretty sci-fi, right? And I didn't come from a background of science. Now, as you can imagine, this plunged me into a very intense quest of research to find out not only more about what happened to me, but what I saw during the experience when my own body vanished from my perception, and right in front of me was an infinite grid of flawlessly aligned energy balls. It was a very sci-fi experience, and I'm very grateful that I had 2 witnesses with me to see the whole thing, or it would be very hard to share this. So, it didn't take long in my research before I unearthed the name Anthony Peake when I heard him speak on an awesome podcast by a guy named Howard Hughes, and the podcast's called The Unexplained. I really recommend it, so check that out, The Unexplained with Howard Hughes. Curiously, Anthony's 7th book, A Life of Philip K. Dick, The Man Who Remembered the Future, is all about the American author Philip K. Dick, whose work was adapted into a slew of well-known movies. I'm sure you've heard of them if you haven't even seen them. Blade Runner, Total Recall, A Scanner Darkly, and apparently Philip K. Dick's work greatly fueled the movie The Matrix by the Wachowskis. Well, I couldn't be more excited to sit down with Anthony. I'd waited 4 years since my experience, and boy, was it worth the wait. We both broke records for this interview. It topped 3 hours, so I've broken it into 2 parts for you guys. So you can have your mind partially blown this week, and whatever's left, we'll just finish it off next week. Full disclosure, this is not for the faint of heart. This is hardcore science, quantum physics. This isn't just a head spinner. It could make you question everything you thought you knew about life, the universe, and who you really are. Let's get to it. Anthony Peake. Just heard so much amazing stuff just upon arrival. I almost don't know where to start with you because you're a fountain of knowledge of so many fascinating things. But you know why I've sought you out, because I had this experience. And because of the Howard Hughes podcast.
What a great voice he's got.
I don't have to read it to you. I can remember. I just found last night, I looked up your name on my computer to see what research I'd done. And I found a note in my 20,000 word document that I've got after what happened to me. And it says November 2012. My brother referred me to this podcast, Howard Hughes, The Unexplained. And there's this guy on it, Anthony Peake. And he's talking about Philip K. Dick. I got to meet this guy. And then it pauses. I just found out he's dead. 1982. So I can't meet the guy. So I have to meet this guy, Anthony Peake, because apparently Philip K. Dick said that everything was an infinite energy grid. And of course, this is what I saw. So far, this is the only reference in all of my research that I have come up about an infinite energy grid. So tag your it. What did I see?
Well, I think what is happening here is that for the circumstances that you've explained to me, you were in a state of hypoxia. So effectively, you had low blood pressure, which effectively means that blood wasn't getting to your brain, which effectively means that oxygen wasn't getting to your brain. When that happens, the brain starts to go into a very, very curious, almost near-death experience type state. When that happens, I believe that the brain starts to generate or excrete certain neurochemicals to defend the brain. And one of the neurochemicals that is excreted in these circumstances is a neurochemical called glutamate. Now, glutamate is the major neurotransmitter of the mammalian brain, but effectively it is also known to flood the brain at the point of death. And in doing so, it brings about what I would argue is opening what Aldous Huxley would call the doors of perception. And again, as a reference, Aldous Huxley, way back in 1954, wrote a book called The Doors of Perception, which was about his experiences with mescaline and peyote and the things he saw. And the things he saw and the things that other individuals see under these circumstances seem to suggest that at its basic level, everything is pure energy. And what we perceive in this reality is reduced energy, energy that's reduced down to matter. In other words, effectively, a nuclear explosion takes place because matter is converted into energy. So in which case, the whole fact that a very, very tiny piece of matter can be destroyed or can be changed into a huge amount of energy very much tells us that everything is energy. And whenever anybody thinks that what is around us is solid, is an illusion. There is no solidity to anything. You know, effectively, research tells us that the atom itself is 99.9999% empty space, and what is inside it, in fact, is energy. There's electrons spinning round. Well, they don't spin round at all, but effectively that's the general model that they have of it. Inside you have the proton and the neutron, which effectively are made up of quarks, which are effectively squiggles of energy. So vast amounts of these things create solid matter. So it's an illusion. And under certain circumstances, there's a breakdown of the doors of perception, and people see the reality as it really is, the holographic nature of reality, the way in which reality is created by light. And of course, light is a form of electromagnetic energy. I think it was Sir Julian Jaynes, or I may be wrong, there was one very famous physicist that actually used the term that matter was bottled light. So effectively, here we have the idea that what happens is, under these altered states of consciousness, under hypnagogic states, which is the technical term for this, it's a kind of a liminal state. For instance, just before you go to sleep, you will see images in your mind. You will see profiles of faces. You will see incredible scenery and everything else, which you seem to be physically looking at. It's called hypnagogia. If you have it when you wake up in the morning, it's called hypnopompia. And I believe all these liminal states are because the brain is in this kind of area where it can tune into different realities. And I think this is what happened to you. You saw the reality behind the reality. Again, I'm reminded of famous writers such as William Blake. William Blake said to see heaven in a wild flower. This again is the message that everything is within itself. Everything is enfolded within itself. Again, there is a great American physicist called David Bohm. And David Bohm in the 1950s and 1960s came up with his own hypothesis of quantum physics, which he called the implicate and explicate orders. And again, he argued that everything is contained within itself, and reality as we perceive it effectively is a bloody big hologram.
Is he the person who coined the phrase, the holographic universe? I know he's in the book a lot,
whether he ever actually used the term holographic universe, because of course Michael Talbot was the person that actually wrote the book, The Holographic Universe. Massive influence on me, Michael Talbot. Wonderful book. But effectively, it's intriguing how he came across this idea. He was working from the cosmological point of view, trying to understand how the universe functioned and how quantum physics functioned. And quite by chance, I think I'm right in saying that his son had read the work of somebody called Karl Pribram. And Karl Pribram because he died comparatively recently, was a researcher at the University of Georgetown in Washington. And he had come to the conclusion that the brain works on holographic principles. The reason being that they've never been able to find the source of memory in the brain. There's a guy called Carl Lashley who spent the whole of the 1940s and 1950s doing experiments with rats to try and find out where memory was. And he concluded in the end, after all these years, that memory wasn't anywhere in the brain, which was a massive mystery. It seems that memory is all over the brain. Okay, it seems to be everywhere in the brain and nowhere in the brain. And Lashley and Pribram concluded that the only way that you could understand this was if you realised that the brain works on holographic principles as well. And also the brain works non-locally. There's something in quantum physics called non-locality, where it's effectively where if you have two subatomic particles and you create the two subatomic particles at the same time, effectively, you can put those two atomic particles in different parts of the universe. But if you do one thing to one particle, the other one will react immediately.
Is this Einstein's spooky action at a distance, or is it something different from that?
No, it is exactly the same. Einstein's spooky action at a distance wasn't... It's a curious thing, the Einstein spooky action at a distance. I think it was in 1935, Einstein wrote a paper with two associates called Podolsky and Rosen. And in this paper, he was trying to disprove the idea that consciousness was somehow responsible for reality. If you go back into the history of quantum physics, you'll discover that there's something called the Copenhagen interpretation. And in the Copenhagen interpretation, which was suggested by Niels Bohr and his associates and Max Born, and people like de Broglie and various other people, concluded that subatomic particles only come into existence when they are observed or they are measured. Before that, they are in a waveform, a statistical waveform, that they could be located anywhere. By the act of observation or the act of measurement, you make a subatomic particle choose to be in a particular point rather than in somewhere else. Okay? Now, Einstein said, I can't believe this. This is nonsense. There has to be a reality out there that is real.
So just to be clear, this is where the whole idea of that the particle only becomes a particle and not a wave when somebody looks at it. Is that what you're talking about?
The big debate is as to whether it's to do with whether somebody looks at it, whether somebody measures it, or whether it is when it comes in contact with anything else that the wave function is collapsed. But effectively, without going into detail, there's been a series of experiments done with something called the twin slit experiment, whereby you fire single photons or single electrons towards a screen with two slits, okay? If there is no measuring device put on either of the screens, when the particles go through, they will go through as a wave, even though there's a single particle going through. And what you will get the other side is what's called an interference pattern, which effectively happens with waves. Waves go through the slits and they cause an interference pattern like waves. And you get interference between the troughs and the peaks of the waves, and they cancel each other out. What is weird is if you fire just one single photon or electron through it, it still has an interference pattern, even though there's only one going through. So effectively, it can't be interfering with itself. So what they do, or what they did do, and what they still do, is they put a measuring device on one of the slits to see which slit the object goes through. As soon as they do that, the wave turns into a particle, and it only goes through as a particle, and they get the wave pattern that would be if particles were going through. They take the measuring device away, it goes back to being a wave. And the only way they can conclude what this means is that in some way the electron and the photon know it's being looked at.
See, yeah, that's the first thing. This will sound very silly, but the first thing that pops into my mind with that is that the photon has an awareness. It's like a celebrity who's walking out of a restaurant. If they know the paparazzi's there, they're going to be putting their makeup on. There's an awareness, like the behavior will change of the photon, right? An intelligence and an awareness of it.
Well, there is, that's a wonderful analogy. I've never heard that. The paparazzi theory of the photon.
The Kim Kardashian of quantum physics is this photon going through this slit.
The Kim Kardashian theory, I think we're onto something. It is very intriguing in the sense that, again, going back to David Bohm argued that the wave function itself actually has some form of process whereby it knows what it's doing. Without going into detail, he came up with something called the pilot wave theory. But effectively, going back 2 steps to what we were talking about. So we have the idea that the particles, and it is important to make the point here. I'm talking here about photons, but I'm also talking about electrons. Photons are part of the electromagnetic spectrum. They have 0 mass and they travel always at the speed of light. They are very ephemeral things. An electron is one of the building blocks of physical reality. It's something that is a point particle. Okay? But this experiment has been done in recent years. There's a guy called Anton Zeilinger at the University of Vienna. And over recent years, he's been doing experiments not with photons, not with atoms, but with molecules, big molecules. The largest molecule, as far as I know, that they found this weird effect happens to is something called a buckyball. A buckyball is a huge football-shaped molecule that has 60 atoms in it.
Wow.
This object still has the same effect. If it's not looked at, it's a wave. If it is, it's a particle. Now, this is intriguing because it means effectively that if molecules do this, at what size does this weirdness stop and become solidity? It means effectively that everything that we look at are made up of molecules.
Right. I mean, my chair that I'm sitting on then, I'm not looking at it, but it still feels solid to me. Well, but I'm not looking at it.
Well, I suppose it's because your derriere is probably collapsing the wave function of the chair.
That's really... I could slap you, but there's a microphone in the way.
Absolutely.
Just so you know.
That's why I was very careful with my wording there. So effectively, for instance, people will assume that we are in contact with physical objects. We are never in contact with anything. You're in contact with the electromagnetic field, which is around the object. You never actually physically touch it. And this is a very important point. When people say there was a very famous statement made about Bishop Berkeley, who was an idealist who believed that nothing was there until you saw it. And a famous writer who escapes my mind at the moment, the diarist, I can't think what his name is now, in the 18th century, refuted the argument by kicking a stone. And he said, I refute it thus, and kicked a stone. But of course, that refutes nothing. It doesn't, because you don't contact the stone. But going back to the EPR paradox now, that we've gone around full circle, but Einstein, Podolsky and Rosen put forward a thought experiment to prove that you do not need to be looking at an object in order for it to exist. I'm going into details, but effectively that's the argument. Right. And they wrote a paper to disprove the Copenhagen interpretation. In 1964, there was an Irish physicist at CERN called John Bell. And John Bell picked up on this theme, and he wrote a paper based upon the EPR paradox. And effectively, he proved mathematically that Einstein was wrong.
Wow. And
that the two particles do need the act of observation, and they are entangled. He only did it theoretically, but in 1982, a guy called Dalibard and a guy called Alain Aspect at the University of Paris Institute of Optics did an experiment where they effectively proved that you take two particles, you entangle them, you put them into different directions, you do one thing to one and you observe it, the other one immediately collapses. In other words, particles have spin. It's spin is the term we use, but it's not necessarily spin in the way we understand it. And one can be either spin up or spin down. So when the two particles are together, one will be spin up, one will be spin down. But because they are in this, they haven't been observed, they haven't decided which spin they're going to be. And they'll always be the opposite of each other. But what they find is that they take the particles apart, and if you observe one and see that it's spin up, the other one immediately knows that its fellow particle has been observed and collapses from a wave into a particle, and it has the opposite spin.
And this has all been proven?
Oh, it's absolutely proven. It's been proven time and time again. The guy I mentioned earlier, Anton Zeilinger, has been doing this. He's been doing this along the Great Wall of China.
Wow.
They've bounced light off the moon. Apparently, I didn't know this, but when the moon landings took place in the late 60s, early 70s, they left mirrors on the moon so they can bounce lasers off the moon. So you can bounce a laser off the moon, and they found the same thing happens.
Wow.
They can actually bounce photons off this.
I mean, a horrible analogy pops into my mind about the yin-yang sort of image. If you say that the one, if it spins up, the other automatically goes down, could this be if somebody's having a great life, someone on the planet is paying a price for it and having a horrible life?
I would like to hope not. I would like to hope not. The good analogy of this, David Bohm came up with a wonderful argument. David Bohm argued that at a deeper level of reality, this is telling us something very significant, because he argues that, in fact, the two photons or the two electrons at a deeper level of reality are the same particle. It is just that we're perceiving them as two, whereas they're singular. And he uses this wonderful analogy, and I love this one. I mentioned this in my first book. He said, imagine a scenario that we're in communication with some aliens, and these aliens are on another planet somewhere, and we can't communicate with them any way other than by film. I know it sounds weird.
This is a great movie opening. I like it.
Yeah, okay. It's a film.
Carry on.
Film. So we have aliens, movies,
It's good, Tony.
films.
I like it.
Good. We got an idea here. Right. So what the people on Earth do is that they have an aquarium. And on the aquarium is one fish. And it's a square aquarium, and they put one camera at one side of the aquarium. And at a right angle to the aquarium, they have another camera. And they have both cameras running, and a signal is sent to the aliens. The aliens have two TV screens. There's no other communication other than what they're seeing. And what they see is a fish going in one direction and a fish going in the other, because they're from different angles, okay? So they see two fishes both going in different directions.
Oh my
and
gosh.
they're two objects. Until one clever alien, call him Philip K. Dick, this clever alien says, hold on a minute, when that one moves that way, the other one seems to have a kind of mirror movement.
Right, a different angle on it.
Yeah, so the aliens both think that there's two particles, but in fact it's one, and it's our level of perception that tells us that there are two. And Bohm said that at a deeper level of reality, everything is everything else. We are all part of a singularity. Therefore, this is why the two things can communicate. Because, of course, the problem that Einstein pointed out with the EPR paradox was, if one particle, you do thing to one particle, and the other one instantaneously reacts, even though it's 10 light years away, that violates the idea that nothing can travel faster than the speed of light, including information. And that was his argument. It violates the theory of relativity. But if they're the same particle, there isn't any transfer of information because they will know automatically.
Of course.
And this is one of how physics is moving now. Quantum physics, people turn around and say, oh, quantum physics, it's not that mysterious, it's not that strange, it can be explained. As Niels Bohr once said, if you are not amazed by quantum physics, you haven't understood it.
Right.
For instance, one of the most famous quantum physicists of the late 20th century was a guy called Richard Feynman. Richard Feynman was the guy that did the research on the O-rings when Challenger went down. So effective, really, really top scientist. Richard Feynman once suggested, in seriousness, together with another guy called John Wheeler, that everything we perceive is one electron travelling at infinite speed.
Wow, it's just doing a lot of work.
It's just doing a lot of work, and it's rushing around. But
it's a type A electron.
It is. Alpha and
it's
alpha
the show
electron.
off of the universe. It's like, hey, Mars, look at me. I got them thinking there's a whole planet here.
And it's the Kim Kardashian one because it wants to be seen everywhere.
Right.
So it has to be seen everywhere, and it probably is. It's the Kardashian subatomic particle. But effectively, if this is the case, this would explain that everything can communicate with everything else instantaneously, which means that distance is the issue here. We assume that there is distance between objects. Say, for argument's sake, that distance itself is an illusion. And people like Ernest Mach, some of the greatest philosophers, used to argue this. Some German philosophers used to argue it. That the only reason that there is distance between two objects is because there are two objects. If there was only one object in the universe, what would happen to space? Is space something between things and it has an existence even if there was nothing in it? Or does it need objects in order to be space? And these are very deep philosophical concepts that nobody's really thought, well, people think about all the time, but nobody really has answers to. But quantum physics is arguing that there is no such thing as space because everything is filled. The vacuum of space is not a vacuum, it's the opposite, it's a plenum. And the reason it's a plenum is it's full of something called zero-point energy. And zero-point energy is everywhere. And it is the backdrop of everything that there is. And it's energy. And again, we're coming back again to the point we were making earlier on, that you reduce everything down, you reduce it down to energy. And everything is different forms of energy at different vibrational states.
Which as you know, was the opening statement when I had my experience.
Yes.
Everything is an illusion. It is all our perception of an infinite range of frequencies and vibrations. So that is a physically and scientifically correct statement.
Absolutely. I mean, that's how vibration is everything. And the question is, though, and this is the huge mystery, is what is it vibrating in? You know, one of the great challenges of science was the nature of light. For instance, they believed Newton came along and various theories of the wave function of light and the idea of light as a wave. Now, we know that light is a wave because it does things that waves do. It can go round corners, it can illuminate a room, it'll spread out as waves do.
Slutty wave. That's slutty wave.
That slutty wave.
It's she's just everywhere.
She's everywhere, absolutely, with everybody at any time. But the issue is, and it was a huge problem, was that if light is a wave, how does it get from the sun? How does light get from the sun to the earth? Because space is a vacuum. And if there's a vacuum, there's nothing to wave in. If I drop a piece of a brick into water, the waves are in the water. Without the water, there would be no waves. Without the air, there would be no sound waves. But space is a vacuum. So how could something wave from the sun to get to the earth?
I hope you've got the answer for this.
The answer is that light is not a wave, it's a particle. It's a photon. It's a tiny point particle, which is what Einstein proved. And these point particles are like little, hard, tiny little balls that fly through space. They don't need to wave in anything. The problem is light still shows wave aspects. Experimentally, it is proven to be a wave. Now, the fascinating thing, and I love this story, is the way science works. Around about, I think it was about 1896, I think, something like that, J.J. Thomson, a British scientist, proved that light was a wave. It was the other way around, never quite which way. But anyway, he proved that light was a wave or a particle. In the 1920s, his son proved that light was a particle or a wave. So we have two conflicting, not theories. Because
awful Thanksgiving dinner with these guys.
They wouldn't get on, would they?
Like father and son, right?
Both
opposite opinions.
One would be firing particles, the other one will be waving through the door.
Right.
As he left. So the issue then is light a wave or is it a particle? It's both, depending upon when it's measured. So we're coming back again to the great mystery of what exactly is matter and exactly what do we talk about. In other words, De Broglie, who was actually a French aristocrat in the 1930s, came to the conclusion that matter has wave-like properties and light has matter-like properties. In other words, they are two aspects of the same thing. Now, in many ways, I agree with Einstein that there's hidden variables. We haven't gone far enough down the rabbit hole to really understand the true nature of reality. But I think the true nature of reality is what we actually know as human beings. And what do we know as human beings? The only thing we know with absolute certainty, and I know people will say this is quoting Descartes, but the only thing you know with absolute certainty is that you are something experiencing something. You are something inside your head looking out at a physical reality that is being recreated by your brain inside your head. In other words, whatever is out there, it is not necessarily what we perceive to be out there. For instance, I call this electromagnetic chauvinism. We believe that what we see that with our eyes is what's really out there. But we're only seeing a very, very tiny part of the electromagnetic spectrum. Light is just a tiny fraction. And I used an analogy in my book, The Infinite Minefield. I just spent ages. I was really, really pleased with this. I tried to find a way of showing this graphically or put it into somebody's mind. And I thought the Mississippi River. Mississippi River would be a great analogy. And what I say is that the electromagnetic spectrum from the infrared to from radio waves right down to, X-rays, the wavelength is really close and really tight. And then it's huge with radio waves. Right in the middle of all that is light. Now imagine that huge spectrum is the Mississippi River, starting in the little lake up in Minnesota wherever it is, I don't know where it is, somewhere far north anyway, and it works its way down to the Gulf of Mexico. Visible light would be just over an inch, about 18 miles south of Hannibal, Missouri.
Wow.
Okay? But we believe that we see everything.
Right.
If you could ever have a rational conversation with a bumblebee would tell you, the world you see isn't like it at all. I see the world in the infrared. You could turn around and a bat would argue, I see the world in sound waves. Sound waves come back and I build a model of the world based upon sound waves. Which one is correct?
Right.
And of course, none of them are correct because they're all their perceptual apparatus, which is actually inwardly creating a model of what reality is.
Right.
In which case we internally model our reality. Now, if we internally model our reality, where is the reality? Is it outside us or is it inside us? Is in fact the brain itself creating the reality around us?
When you said about, the visible light, this actually came during my experience when I was speaking of the information that I had previously had no knowledge of. But it came up, and part of what I was saying was that we can't really see. Our perception is so tiny. And I'm talking about this while I'm ice cold and saying we think we can hear, but we can't really hear. We're only hearing a tiny amount of what's out there. We're only seeing a tiny amount of what's out there. We're technically blind. But I also said, and again, it's me that was saying it, but I feel the information was coming from somewhere else, that we're evolving and that this isn't how it's supposed to be, and that we're evolving to the point that we will be able to, whether it's in 1,000 years, however many years or however much time, we will be able to hear full spectrums and see full spectrums and somehow process the information. And I even said we shouldn't even need to talk. We should be able to all communicate with each other without speech. So it's interesting that you brought that up.
Well, your experience itself intrigues me. I presume that your listeners will know about your experience.
I've mentioned it in other episodes.
But clearly your experience is an intriguing one because it reminds me very much of my own experience with something called the lucid light device, which we touched upon earlier on when we were discussing various things. The lucid light device is an invention by two Austrians, Dr. Engelbert Winkler, who is a consultant psychologist, and Dr. Dirk Prokol, who's a consultant neurologist. Engelbert Winkler had a near-death experience when he was a young man, has always been intrigued by near-death experiences, and is the reason he started to study psychology. And he's also fascinated by the way in which, when he's working with his young clients, that they react far better when they're talking to him in bright sunlight. Sunlight seems to bring out a more conducive way of actually the client-patient relationship. So he contacted his friend Dirk to see if Dirk could generate internally or some kind of light that he could have in his clinic that could illuminate the room in a natural way. And from this, they started to experiment and realize that, you can play with light. And they were aware of some of the work done in the 1950s and the 1960s by a guy called Brian Geisen. And Brian Geisen worked with light in a certain way, shimmering light, because the story goes that Geisen was down in the south of France and he was on a bus. And in the south of France, they have those tall, high trees. And he was looking at the sun setting through the trees. And the trees started to call the flicker effect.
Yeah.
And he started to feel really strange and started to be having visions and everything else. Geisen tried to take this as far as he could, but of course he wasn't a neurologist. He wasn't a psychologist like these two guys were. So what they've done is they built this device using the flicker effect and stroboscopic effects to bring about altered states of consciousness. Now, around about 8 years ago, they invited me down via a mutual friend called Evelyn Olasa-Valerano, who's an NDE researcher in Geneva. Evelyn contacted me and said that Dr. Winkler has read your first book, is blown away by it, would love to meet you, and also wants you to test out this lucid light device. So arranged to see them, go down to Geneva, and halfway through the afternoon, Engelbert and Dirk turn up with this device. Now, again, using a movie analogy, if anybody can remember the 1950s movie, The War of the Worlds with Gene Barry, the aliens in that, it looks just like that. It's kind of like a stalk, and it just looks at you, okay? They wheel it in, and I think, woo, this looks a bit crazy. And they wheel it in, and they say, right, we're going to give you the strongest dose. So just sit in front of it, close your eyes. And again, this is on YouTube. It's videoed on YouTube, so you can see the flickering effect as it takes in. Unfortunately, you don't see what I saw for obvious reasons. So I'm sitting in front of it, close my eyes, and there's the flickering. And after about 2 or 3 minutes, I'm going, nothing's happening here. What am I going to say to them? What am I going to say to them? I'm going to have to make something up. And then suddenly, bang, out of my right visual field, there's a flash of blue light. And from my other visual field on the left-hand side, red light. And they start to spin like a tunnel. And I'm feeling I'm being sucked into this tunnel. Then my eyes start to vibrate in my head. And at that point, I got nervous. And I said to Derek, my eyes are vibrating. And he said, it's all right. It's an effect. Don't bother. It's not dangerous. Right. So I'm sitting there having these really kaleidoscopic things, and it was really fantastic. And then I noticed something in my extreme right periphery vision. And if anybody out there or anybody understands, I'm a classic migrainer. So I know certain visual images I get. They're called scotomas, where you have a breakdown of your vision. It's called castellation. It's kind of a fizzy thing you get in your vision, and you know it's part of your aura state before you're going to have a full migraine headache, or not. If you're like me and you have a classic migraine, you don't have the headache, you just have all the cool weird effects. And I could feel in my periphery vision, I could see kind of like a scotoma fizzing down here in my extreme visual field. And I said, can I look at this? I can see something down at the bottom of near my chair. I don't know what it is. And they said, yes, you can, because your brain's encoded it. So I looked away, and even now, I cannot believe what I saw. It was like one of these kind of points in your life where everything changes. Because I don't have strange things. I have occasional synchronicities, but there's never anything this weird. Mm-hmm. I was hovering around about 20 miles above the surface of a planet. Wow. I could see the curvature of the planet. I could look down. I could see what I thought were maybe cloudscapes or something else. But there were blue lines running in a checkerboard pattern to the edge of the planet, and there was a blue fizzing light around the edge. And being the hero I am, I said, turn it off, because it scared me so much. And it disappeared. Now, subsequently, I spoke to a friend of mine who I'll be meeting in Australia next week when I'm down doing a series of lectures in Melbourne, a guy called Robert Bruce. Not the Robert Bruce, but...
Robert Bruce, who's into the out-of-body experiences, yes.
Yeah, and a few weeks later, I spoke to Robert about this, all right? I was doing an interview with Robert or something, I can't remember. And Robert said, have you looked at the back page of my book? And I said, no. And he said, look at it. And I looked at it, and he said, is that what you saw? And I said, yes. And he said, you saw the astral plane. He said, we have various words for it, but it's the astral plane. I then started reading up on this, and I found something else. And I know a lot of people consider Carlos Castaneda to be a little bit of a charlatan. And there are certain elements where he probably was. And if you know the story of Carlos Castaneda...
I know the name, and I, with very good intentions, gotten books out of the library. But I'll be honest with you, I didn't make it to
Okay, Carlos Castaneda worked with a guy called Don Juan Matisse, who was a shaman. And Don Juan taught Castaneda some techniques of shamanism. But one of the things that Castaneda talks about that he saw in his altered states of consciousness were the lights of the world. And what I saw was the lights of the world as Castaneda described them. So here we have a double whammy of an out-of-body experiencer telling me what I'm seeing and reading Castaneda. So bang back, let's go back to the incident afterwards. So I switch the machine off and I go over, and what they saw, I think, is what you saw, okay? But there's an end to this story. There's a coda to this story, which got even weirder. Was that afterwards I was talking to the two doctors together with another guy that had come along, a guy called Dr. Arthur Funkhauser, who's one of the world's leading experts in déjà vu, okay, who was also with us that day. And as I was talking to them, something quite strange started to happen. I could feel a vibration in the centre of my forehead, like a really small creature moving around. Okay. And it kept going zzz, like this and almost pushing me back. And then it would go away and it would start again and it would go away. And all through that evening when we had a dinner party, this thing kept happening. And then I went to bed that night, and before I was going to sleep, it was bzz, bzz again. And then I had the most vivid dreams I have ever had. They were in three-dimensional, powerful images, kaleidoscopic images. I was seeing animals, I was seeing snakes, I was seeing all kinds of things. When I get back to the UK, something even weirder started to happen, because it was soon afterwards that my wife came down south to do the business contract she's now doing, and I was up at home on my own. And I wake up around about 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning. 3:30. And I think it's something you say, okay? Something you say about the timing at night.
Yeah.
Okay?
Right.
I wake up and there's this noise. It's like Morse code. And I'm thinking, where is that? So I got up and I looked out the window and it wasn't outside. And then I went downstairs and it wasn't outside. And then I realised it was with me. I was hearing this. I got up and it went on from about 3:10 to about 4:20, and then it stopped. The next night, it happened again. And I thought, this is peculiar. So I went online and I found a lady called Sharon Kennedy. And she has a website about people that hear this Morse code sound. And people hear it round the world, okay? There's groups of people that hear it. Now, I started researching on this. I contacted Sharon and everything else, and I started talking to other people about this. And I actually discussed this on BBC Radio Merseyside, when I used to do a show on BBC Radio Merseyside. And what I found was that there was more to this. The argument from what I was hearing was something called HAARP. HAARP.
The weather people.
The weather people, right. Now, and I thought, hold on, I'm on Merseyside here. I'm miles away from Alaska, where the main HAARP place is. Why am I hearing this? So I started checking it, and I found there's a HAARP place in Norway, which was nearer. But I thought, well, even that's a bit further away. But I started really researching, and I found there's a HAARP place in North Wales, in Aberystwyth. Now, why I know this is significant is I don't hear it down here as much. Only very, very occasionally do I hear it. If I'm abroad, I don't hear it at all. And it's not all the time, it's not every night. It's as if either something's been switched on or I'm picking something up. Now, I believe what took place that day in Switzerland is my pineal gland was opened.
With the light gadget.
The light gadget stimulated my pineal gland to open up. And in my book, The Infinite Minefield, I discuss in detail what is going on here. I believe that the pineal gland, well, I don't believe, I know the pineal gland actually, DMT, dimethyltryptamine, has been found in the pineal gland of live rats. Gmo Boragin at the University of Michigan around about 18 months ago did a series of experiments with live rats and proved and found DMT in the pineal gland of live rats. So anybody out there that turns around and says that's never been found, that's nonsense. It's something that people cannot refuse to believe, but it has been found. We know it's in the blood, we know it's in the lining of the stomach, it's various other places, it's in the spinal fluid, but it's never been found the other side of the blood-brain barrier. The reason dimethyltryptamine has never been found in the brain is basically because it disappears very quickly. So it would be very difficult to find it. So they were quite fortunate.
And what does DMT do to us?
Dimethyltryptamine is the most powerful hallucinogenic substance known to man. It is found in plants. It's found in virtually everything. And it is a substance that there is evidence it seems to be a neurotransmitter. If it is a neurotransmitters are things that facilitate communication across the brain, chemical communication across the brains and across the synapses. It is similar to another substance called melatonin. But effectively, they have also discovered receptor sites in the neurons of the brain called the trace amine-associated receptors, which seem to be designed to work with dimethyltryptamine. Now, dimethyltryptamine, because again, there's a very curious aside story here. Dimethyltryptamine is the major constituent of something called ayahuasca. Okay? Now, ayahuasca is made up of the parts of two plants, Banisterius caapi and Psychiatra viridas. Psychiatropus viridas, I think it is. The shamans down in Latin America mix these two things together and make them into this filthy tea brew, which you drink. And then you go places, you visit, and when you go to places using DMT, these are not dreams. They are dreams in which not that I've ever taken it, but I've been told, they are dream sequences whereby you are you know who you are. In dreams, we don't tend to know that, whereas in these, it's as real as this. And in fact, many people argue it is more real than this, so you go to another reality. The interesting thing here is how did the shamans decide to use these two plants in the way they do? Because there are 70,000 odd different species of plants in the Amazon basin.
Right.
They managed to bring the two together. The anthropologists asked the shamans why they did it, and the shamans told a fascinating story. They said when they went shamanic traveling, which they can do automatically because they're trained to do it from childhood, they get out their head, they're literally out of their heads, they go into the upper world or the lower world, and when they're there, they meet their totem character, which could be a snake, could be anything, and the totem will tell you things. The totems told them, the snakes specifically, and the snakes looking like plants, said to the shamans many centuries ago, go away, go into the jungle and look for this particular plant that looks like a vine that goes round a tree, which is the Banisterius caapi, and find the leaves of something called this other plant, mix them together. Now, the interesting thing here is, and this is where it gets really creepy, is that if you take Psychiatra viridas, the plant, and the leaves, it's full of DMT. You put them in your mouth and you chew it up and you would eat as many of those leaves as you want and you will never, ever have an experience. And the reason you'll never have an experience is that when it gets into your stomach, there is a substance that's an enzyme is excreted by the lining of the stomach called monoamine oxidase, MAO. Okay? And it stops it.
From the phrase we hear a lot, MAO inhibitors.
Correct. Now, the Banisterius caapi contains an MAO inhibitor, which stops the MAO being effective, which means that the DMT goes through into your blood system, into your brain, and you have the experience.
Right.
So the two plants, quite by chance, are the right plants to make sure that the experience happens.
Right.
So who are these snakes?
Right.
I believe the snakes is our own DNA. I believe that the snakes are symbols of DNA. It's DNA communicating with us. Why is the DNA communicating with us? Because the time is now right for us to either evolve or move on. And how do we move on? DNA wants us to move on. And how can it do it? It can do it by actually making us realize that this simulation that we exist within is in fact a simulation, that we are in some form of holographic simulation of reality. Again, people will turn around and say, where's your evidence from that? Without going into technical detail, I suggest people start looking up the recent results from a German survey looking for gravitational waves. They are in Germany. They found certain evidence that at the periphery, the universe seems to be holographic in nature. There's certain mathematical structures which is beyond my understanding, but the maths works. Stephen Hawking and various other individuals have suggested that there are the edge of the universe is peppered by Planck-size little mini holographic projectors, which are projecting internally. So this is a two-dimensional hologram that we are within. And not only that, but the hologram is computer-generated in the terms of what we'd understand. And the argument is that it is a simulation created by our future ancestors.
Wow.
And we are in a simulation created by our ancestors. We are in an ancestor simulation.
Wow.
The argument being, and it's very clever, if humanity doesn't destroy itself in a nuclear war and we manage to get over our present problems, computing is going to beyond our understanding. Moore's law says that computing, the power of computers doubles every 2 years. It's been doing that since Moore first came. Moore was the guy that founded Intel. And ever since he made the statement, it's been doing this. And there's no reason for it to continue not doing this. All we need to do is to find other ways for miniaturization. And with things like quantum computing, which I haven't got time to go into, but I do in my talks, quantum computing will show that we can use quantum physics to actually create computers that will be 1 billion times more powerful than the computers we've got now. Wow. Okay, so there we are. In the future, we've got these huge, powerful computers. We have simulations, we have computer simulations, we have the Oculus Rift, we have ways in which we can put ourselves into what seems like three-dimensional simulation
virtual
space.
Reality games.
Virtual reality games. We have our games like Second Life. Imagine a scenario that you could create digitally a complete reproduction of the universe. Okay? If you did that, you would then want to populate that universe. Now, the argument is, why would our future people ancestors do that?
Right.
Well, they probably would because they could. Mankind has always done this. So imagine you have the computing power that you could scan the whole of history and everything that's ever happened, and you could put it into a computer program. And then you could recreate the people that lived at that time within the program and have them sentient and live within the program. If that's the case, suddenly the things that you saw and the idea of seeing reality behind the reality is you're seeing outside of the program. When somebody takes dimethyltryptamine, they see outside of the program. They are seeing the reality behind the reality. So here suddenly we've got the work of David Bohm, we've got the idea that everything at a deeper level, there's a deeper level of reality, which would explain so many observations we have of this life. Déjà vu as a phenomenon, precognitions as a phenomenon. How can we precognize things that have yet to happen? We can precognize them because we've already lived them.
If I saw this matrix that's the backbone of the program, how am I still the awareness of me? Because I still felt like me seeing this grid of energy balls.
Well, because you're still a sentient consciousness, there is still an embodied you, okay, which is still you. But the issue is, and this is where it starts to get technically interesting, is that is there a you at all? You know, the Buddhists would argue that there is nothing behind. When we go inside ourselves, there's nothing there. We are part of something greater. Now, if you look into all the teachings of the great religions and the great philosophies, the one thing you will find is there are two things they will discuss, is finding the God inside yourself, something inside yourself, what Gnostics would call the shard of the pleroma. The Gnostics believe that there is a reality outside of this reality, which they call the pleroma. We are embedded within the simulation. This is what Philip K. Dick argued all the time in his writings.
A simulation within a simulation, do you mean?
Well, we have simulations within simulations now, don't we? So effectively we're in a simulation, but when you go into a computer simulation on your computer, you're a simulation within a simulation.
One, right.
In fact, I was contacted by a guy from America a few years ago who works in a simulated environment. All his office staff are based all around the States, but they are together on a simulation in an office like Second Life. And on the set, and it was amazing, he took me onto this version of Second Life that he was on. And in the simulation, there are computer screens. And on the computer screens, there are a simulation of the office.
Wow.
And in the office, in the simulation, is another simulation.
Like the infinite mirrors
Correct.
Business, yeah.
And he showed me, he said, this is the depth you can go in this.
Wow.
It's recursive, okay? And again, if you look at the maths of Gödel, you look at the paintings of Escher, you look at the music of Bach. I am quoting a book, by the way, and people will say, oh, that's Hofstadter, Gödel, Escher, Bach, which it is. It's a fantastic book, which is, again, about recursion and the way in which things are the huge is the infinitely small, and everything is a circularity. There is nothing outside of the universe because the universe is infinitely big and infinitely small, and they meet in the middle. Okay, so the question is, what is consciousness? And the argument is consciousness is a singularity. There is just one consciousness. And that consciousness is, we call it God, whatever we want to call it. And we are all embodied parts of that consciousness experiencing itself subjectively within a simulation. And we suffer from amnesis. When we are in the simulation, we forget we are part of the greater whole because it can't be real. If we didn't, if we knew that we were, it wouldn't be real. It has to be real. And the only way it can be real is that each element of the simulation has to believe that this is real. Okay? Again, Philip K. Dick argued this. Anamnesis is the realization that you're in a simulation. And when you do that, it's when you're enlightened. It's when you move on, because you can move out of the simulation then. But at the moment, we're trapped in it. The question is, why are we being allowed to have if it's true, why are we being allowed to have this conversation now? And why isn't whatever controls the simulation not allowing us to do so? Why isn't Agent Smith kicking my door down now, coming out, telling me that you shouldn't be doing this.
And how was I allowed to see behind?
Correct. What is it? Is it that sometimes certain people in certain circumstances... Well, I suppose the argument is it being controlled in that way? Or has it got to evolve? The simulation itself has to evolve. And the only way the simulation can evolve itself is if the individuals, the sentient individuals within the simulation, become self-aware. And maybe it's just part of the evolution of this particular part of the simulation. Because there's an argument to say that there is the people who have created this simulation are also in a simulation. And again, you get these embedded simulations. And again, guys, if you're listening out there, don't take my word for this. Read the research of somebody called Vlatko Vedrell, who's professor of quantum physics at the University of Singapore. He's written a fantastic book on digital reality. He gives you the facts as they stand. He takes you through logically how it is almost irrefutable that this is a simulation. And again, this is not the guy down the pub. This is one of the world's youngest and most interesting particle physicists. This guy really knows what he's talking about.
Wow. You had mentioned after you had the light gadget on having interesting things happen between 3 and 4 a.m. And that is one of the things I don't think I have mentioned in previous episodes, that right after I had my experience, starting that very night between 3 and 4 o'clock in the morning, more information would just come to me. And I would wake up and just feel that I was supposed to, I just had to write it down. And so I would keep stacks of Post-it notes by my bed. And it would just flow out, these really interesting facts. And I also saw visuals. I should mention that as well. But I mean, really kind of astonishing stuff I was writing down, but deep down it was coming through with a very deep sense of truth, even though I had never been exposed to information like this. One day, for example, was we are completely misdiagnosing mentally ill patients. And a lot of mentally ill patients, for example, with schizophrenia, are people who are able to see into other dimensions and stuff. I mean, these are topics I would have never had an interest in, never been exposed to. And an enormous amount of synchronicity was happening. And my brother was guiding me through this because I couldn't just tell anybody what I'd gone through because it sounded so nuts. Hey, you know, everything's an illusion. My body disappeared and I was in an infinite grid of energy balls speaking scientific information. Like, I didn't even tell my own parents for quite a while. But my brother, I could trust. And when I phoned and told him about this, you know, we're misdiagnosing the mentally ill. And he goes, just yesterday, I listened to an interview with David Icke, and he just said the exact same words that you've just said to me. You know, so then I go researching David Icke. I mean, I was desperate for clues on what had happened to me, where this information was coming from. And some of the visuals were to do with the nature of time. And I saw them both 2 nights in a row. And one of them was I saw a piece of paper falling. Again, this is between 3 and 4 o'clock in the morning. I mean, completely bizarre. I see a piece of paper falling, but I see all of its spatial occupations at the same time, like the Matrix bullet time, I guess. I could see the paper in all the positions it was going to go through during the fall at the same time. And then another one was that I saw a little pebble or droplet, this is 4 years ago now, something drop into water, but the ripples moved imperceptibly slow. And my translation of this, my understanding of what I was being shown in kind of layman's terms, is that our perception of time is way off. Our time is really slowed down. I mean, just to that point that you could really see paper in all the stages of falling through space. So, and these are just tiny little things of this, all the craziness that was happening after my experience.
Right. Okay. Well, there's so many things there we can pick up on. The first one is, I don't know if you're aware of what happened to Philip K. Dick in 1974. In February and March 1974, he had what he called his 2-3-74 experience. And he called it his theophany. And in this, he had experiences bizarrely similar to your own when he was living in Berkeley. And he had experiences where he saw things like you saw. He was given information download. It confused him so much that he started writing something called his exegesis. And I really strongly suggest you check out reading Philip K. Dick's exegesis, because there'll be so much synergy you will find there between your experiences and his. In fact, for the last few years of his life until he died, he was so preoccupied with this, he wrote a series of novels based upon it. So his novels such as Valis and Radio Free Albemuth all discuss in great detail the visions he saw in semi-fictionalized ways. There's also a movie that has recently come out, which has actually been produced by a friend of mine called John Allen Simon, called Radio Free Albemuth, which I strongly advise you check out because it's probably one of the best movies made on Philip K. Dick.
Wow.
And again, John is somebody maybe when you get back to California you might be interested in interviewing, because he's a very interesting character. Now, the other thing that fascinates me by this whole thing is I believe that we are living our lives again. I believe that the simulation runs time and time again, and that rather like Groundhog Day, we live our lives many, many times. And part of us remembers that past life. It's something I call the daemon, and the eidolon is the embodied part of us within the simulation. Now, if it is the case that you're living this life again, and I'll assume, as a very quick question, do you have déjà vu sensations?
I have strong intuitions more than déjà vu, I'll be honest, just strong feelings of this is important. Even when you talked of the twinkling light through the trees, that was coincidental to me, because just within the last week I experienced going in the car and the light filtering through and it affecting me and making me feel almost a little nauseous, which is how my experience started. And I had the intuition come of there's a significance to this light flickering.
Okay.
And that happens a lot.
Okay. I tend to argue that if you get strong déjà vus and regular déjà vus, it's because you've lived this life before. People who don't get any déjà vus at all are what we call virgin lifers. You're living your first life, you're laying down the first life, as it were. But effectively, the circumstances here could be, and Philip K. Dick argued this as well, and in my book, Philip K. Dick, The Man That Remembered the Future, this is the central theme of the book, because Philip K. Dick claimed that many of his novels were based upon events that were about to happen to him in his own future, if that makes sense.
Wow.
In other words, he wrote one particular novel where his central character was at an all-night gas station, and the character meets a black man and assists him by giving him some money. Many years after he wrote that, he went out one evening late at night to his local all-night gas station, and as he was wandering around the gas station, he thought, this feels strangely familiar. And he then bumps into the black man and he helps him. He had a series of incidents in another of his novels where there is a young woman who is having an affair with a police officer. That's in the novel. And then many years later, in 1973, he ends up having a relationship with a young woman with exactly the same name, who one day announces to him as they go into a bar. She stops him and she says, "Oh, we can't go in there. That man over there is a police officer. I'm having an affair with him." Phil was convinced that his mind had back created from his own future self.
Okay, and the reason I've got an expression, which listeners won't see, but this is what I had happen a lot to me. And I don't call that déjà vu. It's almost like a reverse déjà vu.
No, this is not. This
is the flip side.
Memory.
So that is what I had happen a lot right afterwards. Very specific things, like I was putting some body lotion on. This is within 1 or 2 days after the experience, and my whole awareness was changed. I mean, it was dramatically and profoundly life-changing. I was a different person in my own skin almost, with a new awareness, and I'm putting body lotion on like I'd done 1,000,000 times my whole life, but all of a sudden it was as though it were the first time, and I was like, what are you doing? You don't know what chemicals are in this. You shouldn't just put a body lotion on. You need to find some really natural body lotion. And I go outside to walk my dog, and a total stranger comes up to me, and she goes, "Hi, my name's Janet Bounds, and I distribute holistic natural body lotion." That was happening constantly to me, where I felt intertwined with my reality. I would talk about, I think I want to go to Tibet and turn around the corner in Marina del Rey, and there was Tibetan monks, one of whom I do believe was actually the Dalai Lama, standing amongst pelican poop in Marina del Rey. And
I would think something and then it would happen. It was the reverse of a déjà vu.
Well, in many ways, this, again, is evidence of the hypothesis I put forward, cheating the ferryman, which we might touch upon later, but I really think it's important to follow the salient details of exactly what your experience. Now, if it is the case that you can have future memory of the things that you're going to experience, I will guarantee that you read my books, you'll find that everything that you experienced in your experience are in my books. For instance, and this is really bizarre, is in one of my books I describe in quite detail a lady who had temporal lobe epilepsy, who was somebody who contacted me. There's a big backstory, which I won't go in times here, but one of the experience she had, she described in detail about time slowing down, seeing things in sequences and seeing tea and something dripping into tea and actually seeing the waves going outwards. Okay?
That's just like what I saw.
Okay. Now, if you now know this now in 2016, your earlier self, because of course time is relative, your earlier self is picking this up and that is feeding, what I'm telling you now is feeding your incident, your theophany, for want of a better term, in the past. Now, again, people will turn around and say, the past can't communicate with the future. Yes, the past can. In quantum physics, there is no arrow of time. Okay? One of the things that has been argued many, many times, one of the latest areas of quantum physics, comparatively latest, is a theory by a guy called John Cramer. And John Cramer has written something called the transactional hypothesis of quantum physics. And John Cramer argues, so you know where you have matter and antimatter, okay?
Although you should probably explain what exactly antimatter is.
Effectively, antimatter was first suggested by an English physicist called Dirac in the 1930s. And effectively, it's the mirror image of normal matter. So you will have an electron which has negative charge, but there will be, in antimatter, there will be an electron that has a positive charge, which is called a positron. Okay. And he theorized that every single subatomic particle has its mirror image. At that time, it sounded like science fiction, but it was a way of explaining certain observed phenomena. Subsequently discovered that antimatter does exist. So anybody that thinks antimatter is part of Star Trek, it does exist. In fact, it does exist because if you have a PET scan, it's positron emission tomography. They use positrons. Positrons are literally antimatter. They are positively charged electrons. One of the arguments that's been put forward is a positively charged electron, a positron, is an electron going backwards in time. Wow. Okay? So, and Cramer argues that electrons going backwards in time positrons interface with electrons going forwards in time. And when they hit each other, they cause interference patterns, which explains the twin slit experiment. It explains how a single electron can interfere with itself when it goes through. It's not interfering with itself, it's interfering with a positron that's coming in the other direction. Okay? If this is the case, it means the backwardization in time is possible, which means the backward communication in time is possible, which means effectively that the future can influence the past. And I give an example of this, and it's one of the major areas of my book on Philip K. Dick. Philip K. Dick predicted his own death. He predicted his own death in a quite precise way because I managed to get hold of a series of letters he wrote to his pen pal, a lady called Gloria Krentz Bush, who was living somewhere in the States, and he was writing to her. And in one of the letters, it's a typewritten letter. I can actually show you later if you want. It's actually a typewritten letter. And in it says, Gloria, I think I'm becoming precognitive. He then says, last night I had a series of powerful hypnagogic images. I saw undersea cities, I saw things swimming in the water, and then one clear, precise image. Lying face down between a city and a coffee table, I saw a portly, middle-aged man. And then she says again, I think I'm precognitive. Okay? That was in 1975. 1982, Phil doesn't turn up for one of these regular meetings in Berkeley with people like Tim Powers and his other writer friends. They used to meet every Tuesday. He didn't turn up. On the Wednesday, they go around to his house and they had to break the door down. They break the door down and they go in to find Phil lying flat on his face between a coffee table and a settee. He had seen his own death circumstances in a hypnagogic dream sequence. And he knew it was precognitive because he said that in the letter. Now, that to me is powerful. In fact, that is so powerful. There is a documentary that's going out on French and German television in the middle of February where I'm interviewed. And one of the images they use in the documentary is they actually took an actor on the floor in those circumstances as part of the documentary to actually say this is how interesting Phil was. So everything you're now perceiving is backwardization of your future experiences. Everything I'm telling you now is actually feeding and creating the hypnagogic images of your past. Because when you're in a hypnagogic state, it's timeless. You are outside of time. Therefore, all the information field, or what David Bohm would call information.
And this hypnagogic state is what you believe I was in. This is what near-death experience is, as well as when we're falling asleep.
Correct.
It's this straddling of consciousness and being unconscious.
I argue it is the place where dimethyltryptamine, when it's released just as you go to sleep, technically what it is known, it's known as REM intrusion. Okay. REM intrusion, there's a known phenomenon called sleep paralysis. And sleep paralysis is when you wake up in the middle of the night, and many people experience it, and they can't move.
I've had this.
Okay. And they feel like something's sitting on their chest. Now, this is a known phenomenon, has been known for centuries. For instance, I would suggest that if anybody who's not seen the painting The Nightmare by Fuseli, the Swiss artist, there's a painting and it's got a woman lying on a bed and there's this little thing sitting on her chest. The thing on the chest and the pressure on the chest is brought about because when we are asleep or when we're in a sleep state, there are certain neurochemicals in the brain that are released into the body which literally paralyzes the body. The reason it paralyzes the body is to stop you enacting what's happening in your dream, because you could damage yourself. You know, you're having a fight, you move around, this kind of thing, or you hit your partner. Could be dangerous. So what happens is when you're in sleep state, the body is paralyzed. But sometimes you can wake up while you're still in the sleep state. And this is called REM intrusion, random eye movement, where you're sleeping. You're asleep, but you're awake. You're in both places at the same time, which means that you're in the dimethyltryptamine dream state and you can't move. Now, what people report is something called the hag in these circumstances, where they'll look in the corner, there will be a cowled figure. There will be some figure in the room, a darkness in the room. This is all part of the phenomenon. And this is because you are conscious in that liminal state between vibrational states. Now, sometimes people can, and this is really fascinating in my next book, Opening the Doors of Perception, I'll be discussing this, is some people wake up in this state, get up, go to the bathroom, clean their teeth, go downstairs, have their breakfast and wake up again. And then they wake up again and they go downstairs, clean their teeth, have breakfast, get in the car, go to work. They're in the office having a cup of coffee, look out the window and the window looks weird. They're back in bed again. They wake up again. There's one guy that contacted me. He'd had 12 of these in one day. He'd got to the late afternoon the last time. And as he said to me, a guy called Gabadon, who lives in Birmingham, he turned around to me and he said, how do I know when I woke up the last time whether I was really awake?
Yeah.
And that's true. And that's again the idea of this could be a dream state. There could be another waking state, because in dream state, time expands. We know from lucid dreaming that time expands. We know from any, it just expands. So therefore, a whole lifetime could be within a dream state.
Yes.
In which case, at the end of the dream state, you wake up.
Yeah. I mean, isn't this sort of what interception was?
Inception, yeah.
Inception, interception.
Yeah,
Inception. Combined two blockbusters.
Absolutely. It's even
Inception.
better. The central premise, and if you remember in Inception, there is one classical sequence where the lorry is falling off the bridge. You recall that they're all at different levels of lucid dreaming. And at different levels of lucid dreaming, time dilates greater and greater and greater, since in the lower level of lucid dreaming, it really slows down. I mean, for instance, I don't know if you're interested in this, but I'll be doing an online course on how to induce out-of-body experiences in lucid dreaming states starting in February with one of the world's leading out-of-body practitioners, a guy called Graham Nichols. And we're doing an online course over a period of 8 weeks, if anybody out there is interested in joining us.
Yeah, I'll make sure I put all the links to that when I post this
is going to be extra special because I'm doing the science and Graham is doing the practical aspects of this. I mean, Graham has had what I would consider one of the most powerful proven precognitive out-of-the-body experiences ever. In 1999, Graham was doing a training course on, and it wasn't to do with out-of-body experience, he was training people in other things. He's also a conceptual artist and everything else. While he was doing this training course, he suddenly felt really strange, felt his legs buckle, and he fell to his feet. He felt himself falling. The next thing, he wakes up and he's in a jungle. And he's going, what the hell's happened there? Starts going through the jungle, parts the vines of the jungle to step out on the corner of, I think it's Gerrard Street and Old Compton Street in Soho in London. And he's standing there in the corner of the street going, and it's totally real. And a guy runs past him and he felt the winds, the guy ran past, and he thought, what am I doing here? He looks down the street, and as he does so, there's an explosion halfway down the street, and people start staggering, coming out covered in blood. As he's there, confused, he hears a voice in the distance going, Graham, Graham, are you okay? And it was the people in the lecture theatre bringing him to. He suddenly felt himself rising up, and he's back in the lecture theatre, coming to, and he immediately says, there's going to be a terrorist attack in Soho soon. I've just seen it. 5 days later, there's a bomb in the Admiral Benbow pub in Soho in exactly the location. Graham has signed affidavits by people who woke him up to say that that happened. So that means in the out-of-body state, it's timeless. You can flick any future, past, wherever, because it's a simulation. And of course, if you're in a computer game, you can go forwards and backwards in time.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about time because besides my experience, when I was 16 years old, it was the second time I'd fainted. And I was in a doctor's office and he was describing something wrong with my knee. And it was so gross, the phrase he used, that it made me faint. Now, you can't laugh at me because you were afraid of that. You were afraid of the light gadget. You said stop when you saw a planet.
Now, that's a wimp. That's a wimp.
So don't be laughing at me and my knee terminology. But he described the back of my kneecap as like crab meat. And that just, I was out. Yeah, exactly. Anthony Peake faints during a podcast. So I faint, and I had what was like...
He probably could have turned around and said, what's a low joint doing in a woman like you?
Oh, God.
Sorry, I couldn't resist that one. Sorry.
We're going to help you write some jokes, okay, for your future presentations. So I faint, and I go on this 2-hour journey of a dream. Like 2 hours. It is epic. It's really long. And I come around in the doctor's office, and I go, oh, my God, how long was I out? And he goes, you literally just tilted your head back and you tilted your head forward right now. And I remember it to this day. And that was a first clue to me that something about time, we definitely don't know all the facts about time, because I experienced a 2-hour epic journey and dream.
There are two types of time. There's psychological time, or what Henri Bergson called longue and durée. I wrote a book called Labyrinth of Time on time perception. I was particularly intrigued because central to my hypothesis cheating the ferryman is at the moment of death, you fall out of time. Time slows down for you. Relative to you, time slows down. So in the final seconds of your life, you can live a whole lifetime. Okay? Now, what intrigued me about this was I came across the writings of a guy called Maury, M-A-U-R-Y, who was a French psychologist in the 1880s, 1890s. And Maury describes in one of his books a dream he had when he was a young child, when he had some kind of fever. And in the dream, he dreamt that he was involved in the French Revolution. And he was part of Robespierre and Marat and the group that actually overthrew the French monarchy. And he then became part of that group. And he made lots of decisions, and he was involved in the decision to actually execute the king and everything else. But like most of those individuals, given time, he fell foul of the rest of them, and he ended up being sentenced to death. He goes for a trial. He gives his own speech in the trial. He's then found guilty. He's then taken through the streets of Paris in a tumbrel. He's taken to the Place de la Bastille, where he stands in front of the guillotine. He then makes this long, impassioned speech in front of the guillotine. Then he puts his head down to have his head chopped off, and as he does so, the headboard of his bed fell back and hit him on the back of the head. His brain had back-created a whole dream that lasted hours on the instant to create a dream to accommodate the fact that his bedboard had fallen on the back of his neck. Now, that says to me that time doesn't just dilate in dream sequences, it can expand back in itself. Okay? But we know that human perception can perceive the future. We know that. And again, for people to turn around and say it is not proven, I would turn around and say, read certain experiments that have been done in recent years. One's called the cutaneous rabbit. There's something else called the phi phenomenon, PHI as in the Greek letter. And there's something called the Libet intention to flex experiment. Wow. All of these show that the human brain perceives information before it actually happens.
Oh, I saw something like this in the documentary I Am that Tom Shadyac did as well. And I've read about where they hook people up, their eyeballs and their brains to images.
Yeah.
And they find that the brain reacts to horrific images or happy images before they pop up.
Correct. It's the work of a guy called Dick Bierman and Dean Radin at the Institute of Noetic Sciences. And Bierman and Radin did a series of experiments where what it's to do with, it wasn't their eyeballs, it's the conductivity of the skin.
Okay.
And if we're in a fear situation, the skin conductivity changes. So the skin conductivity was changing in anticipation of the next picture being horrible. There is a counter-argument to this, and it's important to actually point the counter-argument. And the counter-argument is, what they did was they had a series of images. And all of them were nice, fluffy kittens, and then suddenly there'd be some kind of road crash and it'd be awful. There's something called the gambler's fallacy, and it needs to be applied here. And the gambler's fallacy is, say you are betting on whether it's going to be red or white on when you're gambling. The more times red comes up, the more you believe that the next one is going to be white. Even though it's a fallacy, statistically, it's always 50-50.
Right.
But you believe that there's more chance of it coming up. So if these people are looking at all these images and they have a series of nice ones, the more nice ones they get, the more they think the next one is going to be a horrible one. And their skin conductivity goes up. So that could be an explanation. I'm not saying it is.
No, but it's great that you present the other
But there is the counter-argument
Yep.
to say that, and this is, I think, what people like Shermer and people in the Skeptical Inquirer said, that you could actually prove this to be the case. Because I'm somebody that takes both sides of the equation, and I very much, I don't just accept things totally. But I think that experiment was very, very powerful. But the phi experiment is even more interesting because it's to do with how we perceive colours. It's to do with movement, and it's to do with... No, it's too complex to explain here now. But effectively, look it up. It's on my website. I cite it many, many times in many of my talks, but it is intriguing. It means that we can perceive something before it's happened. But this could be simply that the brain buffers information like a computer does. In other words, we are always behind time by around... Initially, they thought about 0.6 of a second. In other words, the brain buffers things to give us a holistic image of what's happening around us. Because, as you know, light travels at a certain speed. So the imagery you're seeing will be reaching your eyes quicker than sound waves will. Like if you're in a garage, an underground garage, and somebody slams a car door, there's a certain distance where, up until a certain distance, it's simultaneous in your mind.
Right.
But after a certain distance, you see the difference. The car door slams, and then you see the car door, and then you hear the sound a split second later.
Like with lightning in a storm.
Correct. They believe the brain buffers this to keep this the way we're doing it. But there's been research done by a guy called Dylan Haynes in Germany. And Haynes has been doing information where people react to certain circumstances. And what they do is they embed an electrode in somebody's brain, and they ask them to flex or to grab something. Okay? They've discovered that, and this is part to do with somebody called Benjamin Libet who did this initially, is that we've already started the movement at the moment we think we've decided to do something. So it means we're always behind reality. Now, on YouTube, if you look up a guy called Marcus de Satoy, Sautoy, and time delay, you will find bits from a TV program, British TV program, science program called Horizon. And de Satoy goes to visit Dylan Haynes. And Dylan Haynes proves to de Satoy that he could be up to 8 seconds behind external reality in his perceptions. And you see Marcus de Satoy, who's a mathematician, sitting outside the research centre, And he's going, I can't believe that. I cannot believe what I've just discovered is happening in terms of how consciousness works. But this proves that reality is processed by the brain, and it's all internally processed by the brain. So there's no mystery here.
So this, I just want to be clear on this flex thing. So you're saying that the arm is moving...
The muscles, the parts of the brain, you know, we have two parts to our brain. We have the conscious part of the brain, and then we have the sensory motor part, which acts automatically like your blink mechanism. These are not done by consciousness. They're done automatically. What Libet did was they tested, and I think, again, they probably used sensors in the brain, and they asked somebody to flex their muscles, like, you know, move their muscles or move their hand and bring their fingers in. They found that the brain had already decided to move before consciousness had decided, I'm going to now move my hand, which meant that free will is an illusion. We think we have free will when we decide I'm going to flex my hand, but something in your brain has already decided to do that before you've even thought about doing it. Now, this experiment, Benjamin Libet, caused a sensation when I think about 1967, 68, something like this. And since then, we're pretty damn sure that we're behind time all the time. This is why we have the phenomenon of you jump before you hear a sound. Have you ever noticed that? You hear a bang, and your body's already gone like that.
Yeah.
And this is because, again, it's this intention to flex. Your body has already perceived the sound and has reacted to it before your brain has had the time to take the sound waves in and process it inside your brain.
Wow. I mean, could this just be a reflex? If somebody's telling you to flex your hand, or if you hear a bang, your body has a reflex.
It's a reflex.
Just the same as someone hitting your knee.
It is a reflex. The intention to flex, the reason they took the intention to flex was because it's not the same kind of reflex. Whereas, you know, there is a reflex. If something falls off the table, you'll automatically grab it. That is a reflex, and your brain will have already done that.
Because you're being told
Because you're being told to flex.
So it's an intention. Nobody's stinging your hand to make you flex it. You've got to decide, I'm going to flex my hand.
But this is again the mysteries of perception. You know, perception in general. I use this analogy when I do my lectures. Is that you are seeing the world now. You are looking out of your eyes and you're seeing this huge 3-dimensional wraparound image in depth of what's outside you. That is being processed by light hitting your retina, which is a postage stamp object at the back of your eye. The image on that is bent and it's inverted. That image is converted from photon and electromagnetic energy into electric energy, which then goes to your visual cortex at the darkest part of your brain, behind you at the back of the brain. It is then recreated by the brain from that tiny image to this huge image that you see outside of the world. The mysteries of vision are one of the most profoundly difficult areas of perception. There have been books written on it. How does the mind create this in the way it does from such little information? Why does the brain knock out the blind spot? You know, at the back of both your eyes, there's a little area where you cannot see, where the optic nerves leaves, okay?
Right.
Which means there's a blind spot. Now, what is intriguing here, and this shows how modern scientists don't think things through. This has fascinated me for a long time, and I was talking to my optician, the glasses person, I don't know what they call it in the States, optometrist, I don't know. Optometrist or whatever. Anyway, I was talking to him and I said, it really fascinates me this. And he said, there's nothing strange about that. He said, we have stereo vision. So effectively, when you're looking at things, the blind spot is taken out because you're looking through two eyes and it just overlaps. And I said, so why don't I see the blind spot when I close one eye then? And he went, do you know, I'd never thought of that. And he said, I was taught that at university, but I'd never thought about that. And that is how modern science works. Things that they can't explain, they just ignore.
Well, there's also a bit of an expansion on that blind spot. I've read in my little book, A Short Introduction to Consciousness, about the pattern experiment where they'll put moving dots, but they'll change something about the moving dots. but your brain will fill it in.
Yes.
So that it's still homogeneous. It's
Yes.
still evenly spaced dots. And your brain fixes the image and you're seeing evenly spaced dots when in fact that's not what the picture's of. Correct. So trickery.
The brain fills in the information it doesn't have, it fills in. So the blind spot, effectively the brain takes the area around the blind spot and it fills it in from the information it has around it to make it look like it's seamless.
Right.
Now, there's a guy called Richard L. Gregory, who's one of Britain's leading experts on visual science. Read any of his books on vision. Again, he's a proper scientist. He's a research scientist. He's fantastic. And again, his books on vision say this all the time. There's a guy called Alve Noy, who is a philosopher who's written an amazing book called Is the Visual World a Grand Illusion? It's again dealing with the mysteries of vision, how vision works. We then spot on then to hallucinations. Hallucinations are inner images that we see. Dreams, people never think about this before. I see in a dream. Something is visually being stimulated in a dream. I see things, I hear things, but these things are not being stimulated by my eyes, but there is still light in dreams. So where does this light come from? And I argue there is an inner light. And there is a guy called Istvan Bokken, who is a guy that I really admire, who's a research scientist in Hungary, and he's been working with something called biophotons. Actual cells of the body give out light.
Oh, yeah.
They give out electromagnetic radiation. Therefore, the brain itself creates inner light for hallucinations. So when you're in an hallucinatory state, you're in this three-dimensional reality, when you're in a lucid dream or whatever it is, that is real. It is just as real as external reality because they are both created by the brain. And this is where people miss the point. They say it's an hallucination. Hallucination is just a label. It's a label that scientists put on something and say, we've now explained it. I call it the labeling theory of science. If you can call it something Latin, even better, because the lay people will be completely confused.
Right.
So somebody has an hallucination. Well, that's explained it. I always say to scientists, explain what a hallucination is. Then you get a problem. Oliver Sacks, the late Oliver Sacks, who died last year, one of my great heroes. He's a psychiatrist in New York. He's English, but he's a psychiatrist, was in New York, that deals with anomalous perceptions. He wrote an amazing book called The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat. In fact, have you seen the movie Awakenings? Robin Williams.
Yes, I would have seen that film.
Robin Williams plays him
in
the movie. The Awakenings was written by Oliver Sacks. It was about L-Dopa and the way which people had fallen asleep in the sleeping sickness in the 1920s. And you remember that they wake up in the 1960s when they're given this substance called L-Dopa.
Was it just lithium or something that woke them up?
L-Dopa.
Oh, L-Dopa.
Yeah. And for them, they'd fallen asleep at 17 in 1926 and suddenly there was no time and they were waking up as an old person, realising that whole their life had gone. But anyway, he writes about these subjects and one of his last books was called Hallucinations. And he particularly deals with, and a subject I deal with in my new book, the Opening the Doors of Perception, is a phenomenon called Charles Bonnet syndrome. And Charles Bonnet syndrome is something that is experienced by people who are losing their sight. My mother, the first time I came across Charles Bonnet syndrome, my mother lost her left eye with malignant melanoma when she was in her late 50s. She nearly died. They had to take her eye out within a couple of days. Okay. And they gave her another eye, a fake eye, which looks just as real. Really weird, it even moves. But a few years ago, when she started to develop Alzheimer's, she turned around to me one day, she goes, there's children everywhere. And she said, little people. And I said, what do you mean, Mum? She said, yeah, they're walking around me. They're always round me. And they're singing and they're dancing. And I said, Mum, there's nobody in the house. And then another day she said, the old gentleman that I see in the kitchen, he's very kind. And I said, Mum, there is no old gentleman. And I then went to the doctors and I read up about this and took her to the doctors. And I said to the doctor, she's got Charles Bonnet syndrome. The doctor had never heard of it. I said, what? Never heard of it. And I said, it's a syndrome when people lose sight, they start to see little people.
Wow.
Okay? Now, what is really weird, now this is a really freaky thing, which I discuss in detail in my new book. A few years before, my mother was walking home onto the village that she lives with my aunt. Both widows, both lost their husbands, so they spent a lot of time together. As she was walking along, my aunt stopped to tie her shoelace, and my mother looked at my aunt, and behind her, there's an old factory site. And my mother said, because my mother phoned me up on this because she was quite scared about it, she said, I looked up and there was this disc hovering over the factory. It was a kind of disc of smoke, and it was moving round. And then she said, suddenly it disappeared. And she said, it's really scared me. I don't know what I'd seen. Now, my mother is into UFOs. She wouldn't know a UFO at all. She tells me this thing. And I said, oh, it's probably an hallucination, Mum. Anyway, 2 nights later, in the morning, she rings me up and she goes, something really scary happened last night. And I said, what? And she said, I was lying in bed and I woke up and I noticed that my bedroom door was opening. And I said, right. And she said, and then I saw these little spindly fingers come round the door. And this little creature popped its head round. And I said, what did it look like? She said, had huge black eyes, a tiny little nose with 2 slits and a slit for a mouth. And it looked at me and dodged back. And she said, what was it? And I said, oh, it was just a dream, Mum. It was just a dream. It was a bloody grey. She had seen a UFO. Then a few days later, she sees the classic Whitley Strieber. I discussed with Whitley Strieber this effect on his programme a few months ago. She'd seen a grey.
I mean, to argue as you did, where you present the both sides, could she not have been exposed to this sort of imagery throughout your work? And
no, she wouldn't have ever known, because when I got into this work was years after. I left home 1973.
Okay.
And I've only ever been back to visit. Okay. So, and the nice side to this story was, I put this up on Facebook about 4 or 5 years ago, and a mutual friend of mine called Morrigan Hawkins said, you're not going to believe this. I saw that UFO as well, as did a taxi driver and one of my friends. We were crossing a bridge nearby, and we saw it hovering over Price's factory.
Wow.
And you're going, wow. And again, if anybody's interested, just check up what Morrigan Hawkins has said on Facebook, vindicating that what she saw was in 3-dimensional space. Now, I think this is linked in many, many ways to her developing Alzheimer's, because she has Lowy body Alzheimer's now. She's just not with us. She's just a body. She's just not working anymore. And in my last book, I have a whole section on Alzheimer's and the way Alzheimer's people are starting to open the doors of perception. And there is an author who I interviewed recently on my own site, who's also published by one of my publishers, Watkins, who has written a book called The Gift of Alzheimer's, a lady called Maggie Latourelle. And what Maggie did was she worked with her mother through the last years of her life with Alzheimer's, and she kept notes of the things her mother was saying. This woman was precognitive. She was seeing things that she could not have possibly known. One example. There was what Maggie's mother lived up in Scotland. Maggie lived down in London. Maggie had been, a few days before she went up to Scotland to visit her mother, she'd been on Google Earth, and she'd looked at her mother's house on Google Earth. And on Google Earth, it was a photograph taken for 3 or 4 years ago, and Maggie's Mini was in the drive when the photograph was taken. She thinks that's really strange. The Mini's in the drive. She goes up to see her mother. Her mother's sitting in the room, very non-communicative. She walks into her mother's room. Her mother turns around and said, Maggie's been looking at the Mini. And just as Maggie says in the book, and she has incident after incident after incident. And the reason is that when you have Alzheimer's, you develop, because Alzheimer's and this seeing little people is linked, because it's known as being a part of Alzheimer's, you're starting to break out of the simulation. You're getting into the world you were in your dream sequence. I believe people that have migraine can do it. I think people that have temporal lobe epilepsy do it in their aura states just before they lose consciousness. And lately, I've been doing a great deal of research on children who have autism. Autistic children are precognitive. There is a researcher in America at the moment called Sharon Hennessy Powell, Dr. Hennessy Powell, okay? Again, you can look up her work. She was interviewed on Opera a few months ago as well, and I interviewed her recently and had a few phone calls with her. Young girl, totally autistic, can only communicate using a keyboard. Okay? So they're they're working with her, or one of the trainers is working with her. And her mother said that she's very good at maths. She can do mathematical equations. So they brought in a mathematics student, and they asked the math student to ask the little girl questions And the little girl would type the answers. And she would type the correct answer. So they'd give her, say, what's 20,000 divided by blah, blah, blah. And she'd put it on the board, and she was always right, or 90% right, or whatever. But what happened one day was they were thinking, God, she's amazing. She's a savant. She obviously is a mathematical savant. Until one day, the mathematician was a bit bored. And when she was thinking of the questions, she started thinking in binary notation, zeros and ones, rather than normal notation. And the little girl wrote down 10111011. And she realised the little girl wasn't mathematical at all. She was picking up her thoughts. So then she thought, if you are picking up my thoughts, type what I would say, type I love you in German. And she typed Ich liebe dich.
Good grief.
Now, this particular paper that she's written, that Diane Hennessy Powell has written and everything else, has caused a sensation in the States. For obvious reasons. Because this proves that people who are autistic are telepathic. There's telepathy taking place here.
Anthony Peake. I told you guys. How's your mind? Is it scattered around the infinite realms of the universe? Gather it back so you can get on with your regular work. Till next week. As always, links, bonus info will all be posted at thegreyescape.com. Massive thanks to Anthony for taking time out to meet with me. We will continue next week with part 2, right where we left off. And here's some of my own info for you guys, because I keep digging stuff up too. The planet has a resonance. It's called the Schumann resonance because it was discovered by a guy named Winifred Otto Schumann. It's 7.83 hertz. That's the pulse of the planet. Well, guess what? The healthy frequency of your brain is, yes, that's right. According to James Russell's documentary, Resonance, Beings of Frequency, your brain is also best functioning at 7.83 hertz. So being in tune with the planet keeps us healthy and happy. And when the frequency gets messed up, we become the opposite. Sick and unhappy. Depressed. Guess what messes up the frequency? Wireless routers, cell towers, your cell phone. Yeah, so not just the birds and the bees that are being decimated by the planet's use of cell phones. So if you want to get a dose of some good old-fashioned healthy alpha brainwaves, get outside, get out of town, into some nature, and switch your gadgets off in your bedroom before you go to bed at night, because they trick your brain into thinking it's still daytime. So even when you're asleep, your body doesn't do all that repairing it's supposed to. Okay, that's my little vent. I want you guys to be healthy and happy, and I want to see you back here next week with me on The Grey Escape. So make sure you subscribe on iTunes so you don't miss part 2 of Anthony Peake, the holographic episode. I'll catch you next time on The Grey Escape. And I'm Natalie Gray. Or am I?